warm welcome. So thank you so much. And just in case I don't get to say it at the end of the presentation, I know it's been a long conference. Big thank you goes out to the entire TOFGA team for putting this event on, and for giving me the opportunity to share today. So tip of my hat goes to you. And sorry I couldn't be there in person, but certainly glad to be here virtually with you. I'm going to start things off just by sharing with you. A couple of weeks ago, I was contacted by journalists from Dallas Morning News, which is nothing new. Like so many other media outlets, this journalist wanted to, some feedback on how, the pandemic was impacting business for Black farmers in Texas. And it made me realize something that kind of was in the back of my mind, but it brought to the forefront of my mind that there's just so much the widespread misperception out there in regard to Black-owned farms in Texas. And basically, Texas has the most Black farmers of any state by a large margin. I think the next state only has less than half of the number of farmers that Texas has. So the natural conclusion is that Black farmers in Texas have carved out some type of footprint in the Texas food system. And I'm here to tell you on the contrary, when it comes to the food ecosystem in Texas, Black producers, with little exception here and there out there, are for the most part on the outside looking in. So last couple of years, we've been contacted by such national media outlets, from everything from USA Today to Wall Street, even local media such as Houston, Dallas, Austin, all making the same assumption in the questions that they kind of ask us. And we've received numerous requests, even from many of our colleagues, our nonprofit colleagues out there, kind of seeking to do some collaborations with us. And while we truly, truly appreciate that, so often they're making the same assumption. Many are just totally unaware, and sometimes they're even surprised to hear that Black farmers as a whole are virtually non-existent in the food system, ecosystem here in Texas. So my goal here today is, number one, to create awareness that so many Black farmers are still in the starting blocks, really, when it comes to farming and ranching and being a part of the food ecosystem here in Texas. Many of those void of hope for any change, which really disturbs me, really touches my heart. The other thing is that, the second thing I want you guys to know is that I just really want to help you understand that it's a totally different journey for Black farmers. And then the last thing, and I'm gonna finish up with this, is that, there's 5 key things, in my personal opinion, from my observations as chief executive of Texas Small Farmers and Ranchers, community-based organization, that will put us on the pathway to racial equity, excuse me, I can't even say the word. I'm trying to say justice and equity at the same time, but a pathway to racial equity here in Texas. So I do want to start off with a few housekeeping disclaimer type items. One is, I'm going to try to get through this in 45 minutes. Again, I do understand this is at the tail end of the conference. Want to make sure we get you back home to your family. So we'll do it, hopefully we get through this about 30 to 45 minutes tops, and then we'll finish up with the Q&A. I will be toning down my political correctness. So if you're looking for PC, I'm not your guy today. So you're probably in the wrong room if that's what you're looking for. Also, I just want to point out that when I speak of Black Americans during this presentation, it's important to really understand and recognize that Black people are often put in a box, categorized by the color of their skin. And really the truth is, just like any other race or ethnic group, Black Americans are made up of individuals with unique minds, unique talent. So I think it's important to say that. Lastly, I honestly feel like there's way too much tiptoeing around the subject of race. We in this room, we're community servants, and our whole existence is to be change agents, and if something's not right, let's get it fixed. So my hope today is to at least take the steps to get it fixed. So my hope here is to really that as you receive and listen to this message, you realize that status quo is really not going to cut it anymore. It's not the answer. So with that, I will jump into my first slide here, which is really highlighting my family's background, which pretty much leads into how our organization, Texas Small Farmers and Ranchers Community-Based Organization, came to be. Our land that's just outside of Bryan, Texas, has been in my family for over 100 years. My great-grandfather, Jack Ross, who was a former slave, actually had to pay for the land twice. You're not hearing me incorrectly. He had to pay for it twice. What happened was his white creditors, knowing that he couldn't read or write, were actually offended by the fact that he used a tree in his back 40 to mark up, make notches, and keep track of his payments. So after he made his last payment and went in to collect his deed, instead of handing him his deed, a group of men actually went out to his place, chopped that tree down, and made him start from scratch, all the way back from square one. So that's how we obtained our land. I would like to say that other families don't really have that same story, but actually there's many, many stories like that amongst Black families. It's just kind of part of our history. So my dad, who you see pictured here, is a young boy, and also to date here, he was actually born on the land, born and raised on the land, and he knew clearly how his grandpa Jack, purchased the land, and he knew the extreme measures that he went through. So it's always been his commitment, needless to say, to preserve that land. Even after he moved up to Seattle, his family moved to Seattle in the late 1940s to work in the shipyards. His dad was working in the shipyards, but his heart was always remained in Texas, and he found his way back actually in the early 1990s to farm the land that was in our family. So once he was back in Texas, he basically put himself on a crash course, a personal crash course. His lifelong dream was to be a cattle rancher. So he pretty much would seek out any knowledge he could get. The good news is he was in College Station right there. So he would go to any and every meeting that was possible. He would even travel if he needed to. And in due time, my dad actually found himself as a unicorn, an outcast. He was amongst the white farming circles. He was, people were asking him, what's this Black guy doing? Consistently attending all these predominantly white meetings, and also in the Black community, to my dad's surprise, he'd walk into the barbershop and, he'd hear the murmurings. They were asking the same question. What's this Black guy hanging with all these white guys for? Who does that? So unfortunately, that's where the similarities pretty much ended amongst the Black and white farming circles. In his travels, my dad's travels from county to county trying to get education and knowledge on farming and ranching, he soon discovered that there were some glaring disparities, amongst the Black farmers. There was just so many basic glaring needs, with so many peers everywhere he went from county to county. And that's pretty much how Texas Small Farmers and Ranchers Community-Based Organization was established. In a nutshell, what we do is we serve as an ambassador for historically underserved farmers. And in doing so, we also try to be an information conduit, a channel, really to help close the economic gap in agriculture. All right, so it's important to say before I get too deep into the weeds here that there are many Black farmers actively farming in Texas. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, I was had the pleasure to be invited as a guest speaker at the Small Producers Initiative, their bookkeeping training, and was very pleased to see the number of Black farmers in attendance. That was very, very encouraging to me. I think I saw Katie Trish in the audience there before the meet. So I didn't get a chance to let you know that, but that was very, very encouraging. Also, I was so glad to see while serving on the Texas Farm Resilience Collaborative, which to me by far has been probably one of the best collaboratives I've seen in my travels. So kudos to everybody who's on that. I think there was a panel today on that as well. But in doing so and serving on the steering committee, I was glad to see the number of Black farms that are generating, up to 25% of their household income through farming. So again, that was very, very encouraging to me. Now, with that said, the reality is when it comes to the food ecosystem here in Texas, the train, as you see in this caption here, the train has left the station and way, way too many Black farmers are standing at the gate holding the ticket. I did receive, and I don't want to believe that, but over and over again, I get confirmation that, for example, a couple of weeks back, I actually was on a conference call and the chairperson for the Texas African American Chamber of Commerce happened to be on the same call. So after some friendly greetings, first thing he asked me, he said, "Man, where are all the Black farmers in Texas?" He said, "I've been trying to reach you guys, so I can invite you to conferences and things like that." And he said, "I just can't find it." And to me, that was a very telling statement, considering that this is coming from the flagship Chamber of Commerce for Black business here in Texas, a state that by far has the largest number of Black farmers in our nation. So the question becomes, why are so many Black farmers on the outside looking in Texas? I try to kind of shifting gears. So I try to make a practice of jumping on national and regional calls regarding any type of agriculture. It just helps me learn, kind of gives me a wider scope of what's working and not working, especially in the nonprofit sector around the country. And in doing so, I find myself so envious of some of the footprints that other Black farmers continue to establish in other states, not so much here in Texas. So getting Black farmers off the sideline and into the game is fundamental to the changing the narrative here in Texas as far as racial equity in the food system. And it really starts with awareness. That's why I jumped at the opportunity to share with you today. And probably the best analogy I can give actually as to what my goal is to kind of think of what happens when you go out and you buy a new car. Then all of a sudden, the second you get on the road, you start suddenly seeing that same car everywhere you go. In actuality, you've been seeing that car all along. You just didn't realize it because it wasn't at the top of your mind. And my hope is the same dynamic happens, once you leave here today with Black farmers, that you start seeing the disparities and hopefully it sparks your collective support for change. All right, let's see. I'm going to grab a quick drink of water here while I let you read this quote from Einstein. Now, most of us, we're so busy that we never really pause to question what we think, let alone why we think the way we do. So I'm gonna share a quick story. Years ago, my dad, he shared a situation he had as an executive in the community college system. He and a coworker who was a good friend were up for the same promotion at his job, at his college. And this was a man my dad would vacation with. They dined at each other's home. periodically they would even go on fishing trips. And this good friend happened to be white, which no big deal at all. Yet when the news came out that my dad was awarded the promotion over him, his friend congratulated him by quitting his job. He said, saying with tears in his eyes, "I'm sorry, Wade, I just can't bring myself to work under a black man. I just can't do it." That's all I can say is, wow, just a few weeks earlier, they had gone deep sea fishing together. Now my dad was hearing his buddy tell him that he could not work underneath him because of the color of his skin. How can a man say that to another man, especially someone who was considered a good friend? And we have to stop before we answer that question and kind of think about it. I think the answer lies in the person's deep belief system that is so deeply rooted that he could not and would not allow himself to get beyond my dad's skin color, even if my dad was more qualified for the promotion. So I share that with you just to illustrate that what we think often shows up in our actions and our behaviors, even if we don't realize it. And it's usually something that's manufactured over time. And I get that it's through our messaging and programming and experiences that we've had since the time that we were a child. But like it or not, it affects how we come to view the world. Yet instead of leaning into history as a tool towards racial equity, so often we brush by history in this country, especially when it's related to the subject of race, simply because it's not comfortable. So to get on the path of racial equity, it is important to understand that the classification of a person based on their skin color did not always exist. In fact, it's fairly new. It's a fairly new concept in our world history. Prior to the 1400s, the concept of race was actually non-existent. Sure, there was the practice of slavery, and it had been here pretty much since the beginning of time, but that typically was a result of things such as war or maybe religious differences, or often indebtedness, depending on the culture that you were, but not skin color. The notion of race was widely introduced and adopted in Europe in the 15th and 16th century, primarily to help justify tapping into the vast resources of neighboring continents for economic gains coming out of the Middle Ages. So shortly after that, enslavement of Africans along with colonization of Africa exploded. And it's also important to note that at the same time, colonizations exploded pretty much all over the world, including areas of Southeast Asia, Caribbean, and South America, but especially in Africa. And in August of 1619, first African slaves set foot on the soil. 1787, Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution declared that any person who was not free, which meaning Black slaves, would be counted as 3/5 of a free individual. That's written into the foundation, the building blocks of our country, and it's very, very important to understand that. Once slavery ended, it's this foundation that set the stage for sharecropping, for mass incarceration of former slaves who couldn't find jobs and were labeled as vagrants, for the utilization of chain gangs for cheap labor, which many called the second wave of slavery. It was a foundation for regular lynchings of Black men and women at times, for the Jim Crow laws that we saw, for the burning down and dismantling of established Black economic hubs, and for much of the racism leading up to the Civil Rights Act. Even following the Civil Rights Act, some of the great advances that have been made since that time, there's still foundational items that haunt us today. It's the foundation that I talked about earlier that has led to fewer supermarkets selling affordable, nutritious food in low income and predominantly Black and Latino communities. It's leaving them with fast food and convenience stores as their few choices that they have. Retail outlets that sell fatty, sugary processed foods. It's this foundation has resulted in some of these neighborhoods having no food vendors of any kind, making it difficult for these families to eat healthy, which leads, of course, to severe health problems right here in the state of Texas, and the growing obesity epidemic that we see in many cases in historically underserved communities. It's this foundation that, if you didn't know, right now, the gross disparity of USDA loans in amongst farmers of color, where in 2021, keeping in mind that we're not even a month out of, we're not even a month into 2022, but in 2021, as recently as that, Blacks were rejected for loans at a rate of 42% compared to only 9% for white farmers. The kicker is that even though Black farmers only applied for the same loan, they applied, 20 times less than white farmers for that same loan. Yet their rejection rate was 42% compared to 9%. These are loans in many cases that didn't even require a credit check. So I'm just giving you guys these statistics because I think it's important to point out what some of the disparities are, because it's stuff that we don't talk about because there's really not a platform to talk about it. So anyway, my last point is that it is this foundation that in modern times like today would make my dad's buddy tell him, I cannot work under a Black man. So just to shift gears, I want to get into the mental conditioning of it and kind of some of its impacts on communities of color, specifically Black communities. I'm going to share a question that was posed to me by one of my colleagues while we were on a road trip. It was about a 3-hour road trip. Matter of fact, we got stuck in traffic. So we just kind of had time to talk. And one of the questions that he posed to me, he said, Phil, he said, look, Black people are some of the most talented people walking this earth. He said, heck, you guys even practically built this country. He said, what I can't figure out is it's been over 150 years since slavery. So why aren't Black Americans more like other ethnic groups when it comes to economic empowerment? And this was a great question. I wasn't actually offended. It made me think. And what I'll say to you is that there are so many layers to that answer. I know people try to rattle off stuff, but if that happens, that it means that they didn't take the time and they don't know what they're talking about, because there's so many layers that I don't have enough time allotted to actually go down that rabbit hole. And I know you guys are trying to get home. You guys and gals are trying to get home to your family. So we won't do that. But I will say this, is that Black Americans have had a different journey, different than any other ethnic group in this country. And the unfortunate part about it is my great-grandparents, my grandparents, and even my parents lacked the luxury of passing along an economic subculture that they could fall back into, like every other ethnic group has been able to rally around as they made their way up the economic chain as a group and as a people. In many ways, in the Black community, it's really kind of been the opposite. Over the years, has created disenfranchisement for many of Black people, and not making any excuses is what it is. It makes it all that more important for Black families to start having honest conversations. Okay? But I do want to share with you, because I'm trying to fast track this presentation here so we can get you guys home, is some of the common pain points, I should say, that are burdening Black farmers. And you'll find that many of these pain points are actually symptoms of each other. They kind of feed off each other, but I just wanted to give a few to you. Again, my goal here is to create awareness. One is lack of hope, of overall hope and trust and confidence in our current system, which goes without saying after some of the things I shared with you. Another thing which is important to know, is that there are cultural language barriers in communication. And I share that with you because I know there's a lot of teachers and educators in this room who are maybe you're a part of an organization that does so. And it's so important to understand that. Just this week, I was in the FSA training for collaborative that we have going, a project we have going with FSA to close the gap on some of the numbers I just shared with you. And I had the opportunity to pose a question to one of the FSA officials here in the state of Texas. And I just asked him, I said, what is, if you had to put your finger on one specific reason why there's such a disparity on the number of historically underserved and farmers of color who are gaining these loans versus the ones who are being denied. I said, what is it? Why is there such a disparity between historically underserved and farmers of color versus white farmers? And the answer he gave me actually surprised me. He said it's communication. He said it's culture and communication. We need at FSA need to do a better job of going the extra mile and communicating in a way that people of color can engage. He said there's a communication gap that typically is resulting in the numbers that you see. So I did want to bring that out. There's also, trust issues. Again, some of these things are symptoms of others, but trust issues that lead into this, the limited engagement, acquiring the knowledge that some of these Black farmers need, such as farm planning, ag production, practices, business basics, sales and marketing, you name it, food safety, it goes on down the line. And as we talked about earlier, the limited access to operating capital, is another thing that keeps Black farmers on the sideline, for startup costs and even to expand their operation. Viable infrastructure, needs is a big one, which, goes without saying. Many of these farmers work 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet. So it's very difficult for them to find the spare time to attend events like what TOFGA gave this week. They can't miss work. Many of them have geographical and logistic challenges and restrictions that do not allow them to attend an event across the state of Texas, which is a pretty big state. So if they live in Tyler and the event's in San Antonio, yeah, it's pretty good bet that they're not going to attend that, because guess what? They have a day job too, and that day job is bringing in 90% of their income, if not 100. Digital divide is a real thing, especially amongst the Black farming community, because it is an aging demographic. Many of the younger generation who may know how to work a computer have no interest in agriculture because what they've seen of their forefathers and the struggles that they've been through. To them it's deemed slave work, and hey, why would I put myself through that? So that's another dynamic that everyone needs to be aware of. The pandemic has actually helped in many ways push a lot of people to learn Zoom and learn different ways and pick up that mouse and learn how to use a mouse on a computer to get where they need to go. So another big one is relevant topics. When Black farmers are able to make it to some of these events to attend, it better be insightful and valuable information for them. Okay, and sometimes you got to meet people where they're at, or guess what? You'll probably never see them again. So there's also some landowner challenges that we all know about, such as land retention, land transfer, and land acquisition and access are all real things, and for any farmer, not just Black farmers, but all farmers. Things such as property tax and ag exemptions sometimes can be a riddle, especially with some of the cultural and communication gaps that I shared with you. So you have to be conscious of that, and I hope I never see any more. I don't have to look at any more of these GoFundMe's to help some of these farmers pull their land out of foreclosure or tax foreclosure, basically because no one took the time to really explain how to fill out the paperwork. Makes no sense to me. And last but certainly not least is, some sales outlets, having, some type of profitable sales outlet to tap into and overall economic development. Let's face it, everyone's bottom line is, why are you farming? If it's taking more money out of your pocket than it's putting in. Okay, who wants to do that? So now, as we look at this list, I do want to share as a disclaimer, there are levels to this pain point, these pain points that I mentioned. Some of these may apply to every farmer. Some of these may apply more than one farmer to the other, or not at all. But the point and the bigger takeaway here is that there's work to be done to get Black farmers in the game. So you pretty much have heard background history, you've heard the data, I've shared with you life impacting stories and how it impacts many Black farmers' life. Now I'd like to talk a little bit more about how do we level the playing field? How do we get on the pathway of racial equity? And before I jump into that, a common assumption out there, and especially when it comes to historically underserved farmers and ranchers, is that they just want a handout. And I can tell you, especially from the farmers and ranchers that I deal with and that I've seen, is that that is the furthest thing from the truth. These folks would rather not engage at all than open themselves and put themselves in a position, that's going to be painful and humiliating to them, just based on some of the past history that I shared with you. So what is the pathway? What does make an equitable food system look like? What does that look like? How do we get there? I do want to talk about that. As you see here on the screen, I made a mock headline, so this isn't really true. So anyone here from the Austin Chronicle, this is not true. I just threw it on there, so don't sue me, please. But anyway, I just needed to get you guys to visualize, that's all. So I do want to point out in the time that we have remaining, some of what I call our 5-point formula. And it's important to note too, when I use the term, the train has left the station, really part of what I'm referring to is that most of the trainings out there are really designed for farmers who are equipped to overcome some of the common pain points that I just shared with you. And really what I want to do is reverse that trend for Black farmers. And to do that, we need to implement a platform designed to get Black farmers back in the game, built to offset some of those pain points that I shared with you on the last slide. And one of the first things is to, create an on-demand learning system, where farmers can go in, learn at their own time, their own pace, and it's scalable, so it reaches all corners of Texas. So that's one thing that this educational platform will include things such as ag business essentials, production basics, land management and planning, business basics, sales and marketing, food safety, all across the board. During this educational phase, it can actually encourage existing farmers to gain real life experiences as well, such as participating in farmers markets or CSAs in their local markets. It can also, along with this, we can provide resources such as land acquisition and things like that to help expand their operations. It also can serve as a feeder, a platform to serve as a feeder program to complement some of our peer organizations out there who are doing other trainings, and also for higher education and ag-related careers. So the second thing I would say is that when it comes is turnkey sales outlets. Upon completion of this educational course, it can serve kind of like an incubator where we can take those who are now more prepared to take that next step to be a part of the food ecosystem and we can really support some of the local food value chains out there, where farmers have the opportunity to plug right in and just have early, immediate wins in some of these institutions out here, such as private institutions, public, and even some of the nonprofit sector. Um, of course, it needs to be organizations who are committed to long-term growth for these historically underserved businesses and farmers out there. The third thing I would say is to be a part of this program is ongoing technical support. And, when we say technical support, it doesn't just mean out on the farm and out on the land, but in addition to that, we're talking about continuing education to improve marketing and business basics and food safety, whatever it might be. Maybe there's some new technology that's out that a farmer needs to know. Maybe they have reached a point where they can evolve into e-commerce, but just ongoing continuing education, which brings me to the fourth item there, which is peer-to-peer training. Right now, just based on some of the things I shared with you, and I went a long ways to get here, is to help you understand, that there are trust issues right now. It's just is what it is. But as I said earlier, sometimes you got to meet people where they're at to get them to where you want them to go. And in this case, if we can also start developing other peers, do some train the trainers, and develop some of these graduates, some of these early adapters that are first, to raise their hand and say, hey, I want to be a part of this, and train them to a point where they can train the next one, each one, teach one, and we can start growing a culture of Black farmers who are now ready to get off the sideline and get in the game. And then the fifth thing, which is really, really key here to change the narrative here in Texas, is on the journey, highlight every win you can. If it's a winning story with resources like social media, there is no reason why we cannot create a windstorm of just win after win after win, using the concept of FOMO, fear of missing out. There's plenty of farmers and ranchers out here who do want to win. They just don't know that they can, and they need to see that with their own eyes. So these are some of the pillars that I feel can jumpstart racial equity here in Texas. So I'm going to close things up with a poem that I heard. You guys have probably heard it before. I don't know the name of it, so I'm going to name it Hope. All right, so here we go. It says, if you think you're beaten, you are. If you think you dare not, you don't. If you like to win, but you don't think you can, you most certainly won't. If you think you lose, you've lost. For out of the world we find success begins with a fellow's will. It's also in the state of mind. If you think you're outclassed, you are. You've got to think high to rise. You've got to be sure of yourself before you can ever win a prize. Life's battles don't always go to the stronger or faster man, but sooner or later, the man who wins is the man who thinks he can. Thank you. All right, so we're going to open it up with some Q&A. I cannot hear too well, so I think someone is going to kind of speak into the mic there and let me know if there's any questions out there.
Him, or you can face right in front of the camera and ask him your question. So, anybody? Okay. Phil, she would like for you to talk about the rate of land loss among Black families in Texas in the current times.
Oh, great question. I do not have any specifics. So what I do know, just to kind of give you a frame of reference, I do know when it comes to current times, just around and hopefully this kind of gives you an idea. Just around my ranch down in the Brazos County, there were, just 10 years ago, there were 13 Black families. Just 10 years ago, we're down to 2. One being our family, the other being a family that we actually previously leased their land. My parents and I, we were doing some grass farming, and they were around the corner. During that time, we leased the land for maybe about, I want to say 12 years, in addition to having our land. And in doing so, we were able to get them ag exemption, because the million of meetings my dad actually went through, and boards he was joining, one of them was the tax assessor office in Brazos County. So he learned, the ins and outs of ag exemption. Most Black farmers don't know anything about that. And if they do know about it, like I said, it's a riddle. So while I don't have any numbers off the top of my head, I can tell you that we are the last. There's only 2, and the only reason that there's another one besides us is we were able to get ag exemption for them and tell them how to fill out the paperwork. I have been contacted. On the flip side, I've been contacted by folks in the surrounding areas over and over again about losing their land. We even got, so even folks who are not Black people, who are not farmers and ranchers, have been losing losing their land like crazy. What typically happens is a developer comes in, reaches out to a family member who's not connected with that land. And that family member may live in California somewhere, and they're just an heir to the property. In many cases, Black families have not taken the time to do their paperwork. So that land, when someone dies, guess what? The paperwork has not been done. There's no will in many cases. And so what happens, some of the tactics that we're seeing is that, and we know this because my dad's was formerly on the tax board in Brazos County. They call him all the time. So we get feedback that every day there's developers, down in the tax offices combing what they call cheap land, which is code in many cases for Black land. And when they do find it, they use those type of tactics. They'll even get someone in your family to sign some paperwork just to get it tied up in court and out-lawyer you. Just 2 weeks ago, I had a young lady call me, and she needed help. I reached out to some resources, including the Houston bar where the court presentations were taking place, to get her some help, but it was pretty much too late. They were out-lawyered. So sorry, I don't have any numbers or data with you, but hopefully I gave you a frame of reference on what's really going on in our around the state of Texas.
Okay. Our next question is, what is your favorite part of the day on your property, your ranch, the part you look forward to the most?
My favorite part of the day is just when we are giving I like feeding. I like feeding our cattle. I don't really care for much anything else. I have a brother who's actually out there all the time, and he's fixing fences and doing a bunch of grunt work. He even plants gardens. He just loves it. Not my thing. I'm more the paper pusher of the family, but I do like feeding our cattle. And I tend to write the most checks, so I get to do that.
Repair any of the things that are not curious how that how no corruption
Okay, so this is a long one. So she said that she saw last year that the USDA was doing programs to send money to farmers of color. And she was wondering if there's still corruption in the system. How is that process being handled? Is that going to actually do any thing useful?
Last I heard, though, that money was, I think Sid Miller issued a counter lawsuit stating that it was reverse racism for white farmers. So I don't, and that's pretty, so that kind of tells you where that stands, that money. Matter of fact, I personally have a farm loan that was actually going to, I literally almost had paid it off. I think I had like a fraction of one payment left. I was hoping I could keep that money in my pocket, but that time came and went. So I went ahead and sent the check in, assuming that that's not going to go through. So it's tied up in the courts. What happens? I have no clue. The premise of those of that money was to try to do some of the things we're talking about, level the playing field. USDA has openly admitted, some of the discrimination acts. They've openly admitted that the blatant racism and the impact it has. They know, they understand. They're not trying to run away from it. But last I heard, just to get back to your question, is that there's no that hasn't landed in any Black farmers' bank account or any relief at all. It's tied up in the courts.
Yeah, you mind if I go?
Yeah, come on.
Oh, perfect. All right, first off, I want to say I appreciate you, brother, for being here. And I have just one quick question. So we get a lot of conversations about creating will, understanding Aaron's property. Can you use your family as an example of what's going to happen to the land after such and so passes away? What's the future of that land, and how are you and your family planning for the future? Thanks.
All right. So glad you asked. So just so you know, my family's like every other family. It's tough conversations. So up to about 2 months ago, our family, so the way, going back to Jack Ross, he had 6 children. Once he passed away, he left the land he split the land. He left the land to all 6 children. In the 70s, the 6 children split the 120 acres up into 6 20-acre, 19.6 whatever lots. So they split it up, and now that makes it kind of tricky. As I told you before, we were leasing land, my dad, myself, my brother, around the corner, because it made it tricky farming on land that was owned by 6 different relatives. 6 different families in one family. But what we did is we called a meeting. Actually, they volunteered me to lead the group, which I didn't want to do because I knew that'd be a tall task, because I know the people in my family. But it actually went pretty well. I actually put together a nice little PowerPoint. My family, meaning my dad, is actually the only one out of all our entire family going back 100 years who's actually farming the land. And we were able to show them how, their ag bill would be totaled to be about $11,000 a year versus the I think it's $50 or so each one of them were paying. So we started the meeting off that way. It calmed everything else down. Everything else was kind of a easy conversation at that point, but we were able to get rid of a lot of the myths that we were trying to take things over, and really just let them know that we were trying to preserve the land for the benefit of everyone. What we're doing now, I'm not sure if you had the opportunity. My website's posted at the bottom of this page. If you go on there, you'll find a heirs property event we held just last week called Hold On to Your Land organization. So I encourage you to check that out. But what we did is we reached out. My parents are now creating a trust, and what we're going to do is create our own trust, reach out to through a estate planner, and put some things in motion to make sure that we protect the land from some of the developers and some of the other shenanigans that are going on that are causing other folks to lose that land. And we're encouraging our other the family members on the other 5 plots to do the same. Hopefully that answers your question, but not sure.
Anybody else? Okay, I think that's all of our questions. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. You guys go home, get some rest.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Phil.
Awesome help. Thanks, Bill.